I have an opening question for you today. That question is this: what is something illegal 100 years ago, but is legal today? Anyone have an answer? Next hint: it inspired the 18th Amendment to the Constitution. Anybody remember the 18th Amendment? Well, next one. It was called the Noble Experiment. My last hint. It is this: it was a crime to manufacture, transport, or sell alcoholic beverages. From 1920 to 1933 is referred to as the Prohibition era. There probably is no one here that remembers that. I remember it being talked about, of course. I think we all have and learned in history. At that period of time, all bars, all saloons, all liquor stores were shut down. Or were they shut down? Instead of ending the practice of drinking alcoholic beverages, the 18th Amendment just simply drove it underground, literally underground. And these places where you could buy liquor were called speakeasies. A good name, because when you went there, you were to speak easy. Don't yell. The sheriff might hear you. They were speakeasies. An example could, of course, have been found in nearly every village, town, and city in the United States. Instead of ending the practice of drinking alcohol, they was driven underground. And an example is found in many places, but I'm going to lift the one up from Los Angeles, California. While law enforcement and government officials pretended to stop the flow of liquor in the city, underneath the city there were 11 miles of service tunnels. There were passages that were hidden for hidden saloons. There was also that underground network in St. Louis, still exists, but it doesn't go to the taverns anymore, it just exists. And by 1927, 7 years after the passage of the 18th Amendment abolishing alcoholic beverages, there were approximately 30,000 illegal saloons or speakeasies in Los Angeles. Twice the number of legal bars operating before the law was passed. So, we can laugh, and we do, at that type of hypocrisy that exists, but it is still somewhat prevalent, not into that extent, or maybe more, but in different ways. There is the hypocrisy. We have problems with moral and ethical consistencies. Sometimes we fail to meet our own standards. As Christians, as Jesus followers, others are watching us, drawing conclusions about the character of God that we exhibit and the authenticity of our faith that we have and we confess. Do our actions match our words? As that familiar song we learned some decades ago, they'll know we're Christians by our love. They will know we're Christians by our actions. The gospel passage today revolves around, we might say, the question of optics. It says that now when the Pharisees and some of the scribes who had come from Jerusalem gathered around Jesus, they noticed that some of his disciples were eating with defiled hands, that is, without washing them. Well, now, of course, we have a good practice and always have had that. We should wash our hands before we eat. But there was even more to this than simply washing one's hands before you eat. There was a ceremony. It was a ceremonial action that took place. In fact, if you go to Israel today and are staying in a hotel or eating in a restaurant, you will see on the wall 2 or 3 or so washing stations. They're not there for cleanliness. They're there that the Jews practicing might ceremoniously wash their hands before they eat. The gospel passage today speaks of that, but Jesus calls them out. Aha, the Pharisees thought, we caught Jesus. We caught his disciples. They didn't wash their hands ceremoniously before they sat down to eat. They are breaking the rules. Surely this man cannot be a great religious leader. But instead of hanging his head in shame, slinking away, Jesus turns the tables on the Pharisees and writes, he said to them, Isaiah prophesied rightly about you hypocrites, as it is written, this people honors me with their lips, but their hearts are far from me. In vain do they worship me, teaching human precepts as doctrines. You abandon the commandment of God and hold to human tradition. The great sin of the Pharisees was hypocrisy. They loved the law more than they loved God. They cared more about keeping religious rules than honoring God and serving others. They were not motivated the right direction in their heart. They set a standard for others, but opted out themselves. I sometimes am guilty of doing that, as I assume that maybe others are also. The standards I set for others are higher than the standard that I have for me. The Pharisees' hypocrisy, my hypocrisy, our hypocrisy, drives people away from God because it does not show an authentic relationship with Jesus and God. Pastor Ron Dunn of Irving, Texas, had an unsettling experience when he discovered there was another man in Irving, Texas, also named Ron Dunn. This other Ron Dunn was known for passing bad checks. Imagine the embarrassment of Pastor Dunn and his wife when store clerks stared cynically at the name on the check and then refused them service. Pastor Dunn and his wife had to tell numerous store clerks, we are not the Ron Dunn you're looking for. Pastor Dunn wrote, now it's okay for someone else to have my name. I do not have a copyright on it. But what disturbed me was people were judging me by what someone else with my name was doing. By the behavior of this other Ralph Dunn, he gave people the wrong impression of me. I am afraid this is the reason the world has a distorted view of Christ also. It has judged Christ by what others who bear his name have done. The sin of the Pharisees and our sin to say we're followers of Christ, but we fall short. Says Christ, you abandon the commandments of God and hold to human tradition. Many of us are satisfied to live according to the standards of our society, but Christ offers us a way of life that is different. When the Pharisees asked Jesus, and in fact tried to trick him into asking him, what is the greatest of all the commandments? And there were not only the 10 commandments, but there were 300 plus other commandments, and they wanted to know, now Jesus, what's the greatest of all these commandments? Can you tell us? Well, Jesus didn't point to a rule or a religious observation or to church Jewish traditions. He pointed to a relationship. He said this: love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, with all your mind. This is the first and greatest commandment, and the second is like it. Love your neighbor as yourself. All the law and the prophets hang on these two commandments. Everything hangs on those two commandments. Love the Lord our God with all our heart, with all our strength, and with all our mind, and love our neighbors as ourselves. All the law and prophets hang on these two. This is the strength and the core of our gospel lesson today and always. The story is told, then lives are to be lived. When the great cathedrals of Europe were built hundreds and centuries ago, most of the population of Europe was illiterate. They could not read nor write. Architects, sculptors, and artists created these great cathedrals, and they filled them with carvings, statues, stained glass windows. Why? To tell the story of God through art. They could read the story of God through the images in the church. That's still a great way to spread the message of Jesus. For many people, we are the living cathedrals. People read the story of God in the way we live our lives. We can look at our own beautiful stained glass windows and see there in art and color the story of God in our lives, of the anchor, of the cup of blessing, of the vines, of the beautiful lilies that adorn on either side of our altar. This is the story of God in our life. To defeat the hypocrisy, we must move our testimony from lips to living. We cannot experience the abundance unless we live with a loving heart. Author Brennan Manning wrote, "The greatest single cause of atheism is Christians who acknowledge Jesus with their lips, deny Jesus with their lives." Years ago, the very well-known missionary E. Stanley Jones met Mahatma Gandhi, the person who led the nonviolent resistance campaign that freed India from British rule. E. Stanley Jones, the missionary, asked Gandhi, "How can Christianity make a stronger impact on your country, India?" Gandhi said, "First, Christians need to live more like Jesus. Second, Christians must present the message of Jesus without cultural baggage, not referring to the cultures of the day. And third, Christians should emphasize love, which is the core of faith." This is our life. This is our calling. This is our legacy. Let us live that life according to the core message of our faith. We can get an unbelieving world to believe if they see us in Christ-like actions. William Booth, one of my favorite persons of history, the founder of the Salvation Army, was asked for the secret to his success. William Booth replied, "I will tell you the secret. God has all there is of me. God has all of me. There have been men with better brains, greater talents, and greater opportunities, but from the day I got a vision for what Jesus could do with the poor of London, I made up my mind God would have all of William Booth there was. God has all of us. Does he have our brains, our charisma, our energy, our skills, our very life? Take my life and let it be consecrated, Lord, to thee. Our total love. Will Campbell was a pastor and civil rights activist. He died recently in 2013. Campbell was known for his love for the poor and for putting faith into action, even when it required great sacrifice. The story is told of Will Campbell. One Sunday he was preaching at Duke University Chapel. Well, Duke University Chapel is one of the centers of preaching in Raleigh, North Carolina. It's a magnificently constructed, beautiful place of worship. And this was a great preacher, and they're known for their preaching. An ice storm surprisingly blanketed the area the previous night, but people still showed up to hear the prominent preacher and theologian speak. But instead of an inspiring sermon, Campbell said, "Had an ice storm last night. Lots of trees down. Lots of poor people in this town. Electricity is off a lot of places. They've got no heat. I got my pickup outside, got my chainsaw with me, and my wood axe. I'm going out to cut some firewood to help those poor people. Who's going to go home and get their trucks and axes and help the poor?" He stepped down from the pulpit and walked out of the church. Will Campbell didn't just honor God with his words, but his actions. He loved God with everything that was in him and his neighbor as himself. Jesus loves us too much to leave us in our hypocrisies, to leave us in our insincere faith and relationships. He loves us so much, so very much, that he cares for us and gave us a brother, a human, to walk with us, named Jesus. Jesus is our way, is our truth, and is our life. The cure for hypocrisy is to live a life that Christ calls us to live. Love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, and with all your mind. This is the first and greatest commandment, and the second is like it. Love your neighbor as yourself. All the law and the prophets hang on these two commandments. Thanks be to God for the gift of each of us that we can share in this ministry, that our words and our actions will go hand in hand. Love the Lord your God and love your neighbor as yourself. As we go forth from this place, as we break bread and share around our tables at home or in restaurants today and in days to come, let others see us and know that we're Christians by our love, our compassion, and our respect for one another. I thank you for being part of my life, that I can share what God has given me with you, and you share with me what God has given you. Thanks be to God. Amen.